There's a story we've been telling ourselves about the teenage brain for nearly 50 years. It's a story about subtraction, about cleaning house, about becoming more efficient. The dominant theory has been elegant in its simplicity. Childhood builds an excess of neural connections, and adolescence prunes them away. Less becomes more. This narrative has shaped education policy, criminal justice decisions about teenage responsibility, and how parents interpret their teenagers' behavior. But what if the story was only half right? In January 2026, researchers at Kyushu University in Japan published findings that challenge everything we thought we knew. They didn't just add a footnote to the pruning hypothesis. They discovered something hiding in plain sight, something that suggests the adolescent brain isn't just eliminating, it's simultaneously constructing something entirely new. Dense clusters of synapses, neural connection points, appearing in specific locations during adolescence, hotspots of growth that no one knew existed until now. And when these hotspots fail to form properly, the implications point toward schizophrenia, one of psychiatry's most mysterious conditions. This isn't a minor revision, it's a paradigm shift. To understand why this matters, we need to go back to the late 1970s and early 1980s. This was when neuroscientists first began mapping what happens inside the adolescent brain. What they found seemed counterintuitive at first. Young children's brains were denser with synaptic connections than adult brains. Teenagers appeared to be losing neural real estate. The prevailing interpretation became known as synaptic pruning. The idea was simple and compelling. Use it or lose it. Unused connections get eliminated. The brain, according to this model, becomes more efficient by streamlining. Like a sculptor removing marble to reveal the statue within, adolescence carves away the excess. This theory became so dominant that it shaped entire fields. Developmental psychologists used it to explain why teenagers make risky decisions. Their prefrontal cortex was still being pruned. Educators cited it when designing curricula. Legal scholars referenced it in debates about whether teenagers should face adult consequences for crimes. The pruning hypothesis became common knowledge. But here's what's interesting about scientific consensus. It can sometimes become so accepted that researchers stop questioning the underlying assumptions. For decades, neuroscientists had the tools to see that the brain was losing synapses overall during adolescence. What they couldn't see was what was happening in specific locations. It's like watching a neighborhood from a helicopter. You might notice that some buildings are being torn down, but from that altitude, you'd miss the new construction happening in specific lots. The Kyushu University research team made their discovery using advanced imaging techniques that allowed them to examine specific regions within individual neurons, not just overall synaptic density. What they found overturned 45 years of assumptions. In their own words, the adolescent brain does not simply eliminate connections. It also creates new, tightly packed clusters of synapses. These clusters form in specific parts of neurons during adolescence, locations where they didn't exist before. The researchers call them synaptic hotspots, and they emerge only during this developmental window. Think about what this means. While the broader brain is pruning, losing connections in most areas, specific dendritic compartments are doing the opposite. They're building. The well-established adolescent synaptic pruning hypothesis must be reconsidered. Those are the researchers' own words. Not modified, not refined, reconsidered entirely. Now, to be clear about methodology, this research was conducted in mice, not humans. That's an important caveat. Mice brains aren't human brains. But mice share many fundamental neural mechanisms with humans, which is why they're used in neuroscience research. The basic architecture of how neurons connect and communicate is remarkably similar across mammals. What makes this finding particularly compelling is what happened when researchers looked at mice carrying genes associated with schizophrenia in humans. The team examined mice carrying mutations in 3 specific genes: SETAB1A, HIVEP2, and GRIN1. All three have been linked to schizophrenia risk in human genetic studies. In mice carrying these schizophrenia-associated genes, the synaptic hotspots failed to form. The construction process that should have happened during adolescence simply didn't occur. This suggests something profound. Schizophrenia might not be primarily about losing too many connections during adolescence, as previously theorized. It might be about failing to build new ones. To understand why this matters, consider the timeline of schizophrenia. It typically emerges in late adolescence or early adulthood, precisely when these hotspots should be forming. Researchers have long wondered why this devastating condition appears when it does. Why not childhood? Why not middle age? The timing has always seemed significant, but the mechanism was unclear. If adolescence is a critical window not just for pruning, but for constructing specific neural architecture, then disruptions during this window would have consequences that only become apparent later. The old model suggested schizophrenia resulted from excessive pruning, the brain eliminating too many connections. The new model suggests the opposite problem: insufficient building. This isn't just an academic distinction. It could fundamentally change how we approach prevention and treatment. If the problem is failed construction, early interventions might focus on supporting synapse formation. But let's step back from schizophrenia for a moment and consider what this means for understanding typical teenage development, because the implications extend far beyond mental illness. Recent research published in December 2025 adds another layer to this picture. A study analyzing over 4,000 MRI brain scans found that brain development continues until approximately age 32. Not early 20s, as previously assumed. 32. That's nearly a decade longer than the conventional view suggested. The study found that the period from age 9 to 32 represents the most topologically dynamic epoch of brain development across the entire human lifespan. Think about that. The brain isn't reaching its final form by high school graduation. It's not even close. Major construction projects are still underway when people are starting families and advancing in careers. The research describes adolescence and young adulthood as a period marked by profound changes in learning, decision-making, and higher-order cognition that parallel these structural brain changes. So when we combine these findings, the synapse hotspot discovery with the extended timeline of brain development, a very different picture of adolescence emerges. The teenage brain isn't a construction site being torn down. It's a construction site where demolition and building are happening simultaneously, in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Some areas are being cleared to make way for more efficient pathways. Other areas, specific, strategic locations, are experiencing a building boom that only happens during this window. The researchers at Kyushu specifically noted that while pruning occurs broadly across the brain, synapse formation takes place in specific dendritic compartments, the receiving ends of neurons. These dendritic compartments are where neurons receive signals from other neurons. By building dense clusters of synapses in specific locations, the brain may be creating specialized receiving stations. Imagine a city that's both demolishing outdated infrastructure and simultaneously building high-capacity data centers in strategic locations. That's closer to what the adolescent brain is doing. This dual process helps explain something parents and teachers have always observed. Teenagers can be simultaneously capable of remarkable insight and bewildering lapses in judgment. Different parts of the brain are at different stages of construction. Some systems are newly built and highly functional. Others are mid-renovation, scaffolding still up. The implications for education are significant. If the adolescent brain is actively building new cognitive infrastructure, then the experiences during this window may shape what gets built. This isn't the old use it or lose it model applied to pruning. It's something more generative. The brain may be building based on what it's learning to use. Consider learning a musical instrument during adolescence versus learning it at 40. Both are possible. But something about the teenage brain seems to encode these skills more deeply. We've always attributed this to pruning, the brain eliminating unused musical pathways if you don't practice. But the hotspot discovery suggests something additional. The brain may be building music processing infrastructure. The research explicitly challenges what the authors call the well-established adolescent synaptic pruning hypothesis. They're not adding nuance. They're saying the model needs fundamental revision. For parents, this reframing matters enormously. The teenager who seems scattered, contradictory, and maddening isn't broken. They're under construction, but not in the way we thought. They're not just losing the unnecessary. They're building the essential. And that building process is noisy, chaotic, and doesn't proceed in a straight line. There's something almost poetic about this discovery. The teenage years have always been characterized by intensity, intense emotions, intense friendships, intense experiences. Now we know there's intense building happening too. The brain isn't just editing down to essentials. It's actively constructing new capabilities that didn't exist before. Adolescence is generative, not just subtractive. The schizophrenia connection reveals the stakes of this process. When construction fails, when the hotspots don't form, the consequences can be devastating and lifelong. This connection also offers hope. If we understand the mechanism, we might eventually be able to support the building process in those at risk. Early intervention programs for schizophrenia have focused largely on identifying symptoms and managing them. But what if we could support the underlying construction process before symptoms ever appear? We're not there yet. This research is new, and translating mouse findings to human treatments takes years of additional study. But the direction is promising. What's particularly intriguing is that the 3 genes implicated, SETD1A, HIVEP2, and GRIN1, affect different aspects of neural function, yet all 3 mutations resulted in the same outcome: failed hotspot formation. This suggests that synapse hotspot formation may be a final common pathway, a critical bottleneck where many different genetic risk factors converge. If that's true, it might explain why schizophrenia has such complex genetics. Hundreds of gene variants have been linked to risk, but they might all be affecting the same construction process. For researchers trying to develop treatments, a final common pathway is good news. Instead of targeting hundreds of different genes, you might be able to support the downstream process they all affect. So what does this mean for those of us who aren't neuroscientists? Let me offer some ways to think about these findings in everyday terms. First, if you're a parent of a teenager, recognize that their behavior reflects active brain construction, not just elimination. Their brains are building as much as they're pruning. That inconsistency you see, brilliant insight one moment, baffling decision the next, makes sense when you realize different systems are at different stages of construction. Second, for educators, the experiences you provide during adolescence may shape what neural infrastructure gets built. This isn't just use it or lose it. It's use it and build it. Rich, challenging experiences during this window may stimulate the construction process. Conversely, impoverished environments might result in fewer hotspots being built. Third, understand that brain development continues well into the early 30s. A 25-year-old's brain is still under construction, even if society treats them as fully formed adults. This has implications for everything from hiring practices to criminal justice. The brain of a 22-year-old is not the brain they'll have at 32. Fourth, for young people themselves, your brain is actively building its capabilities right now. What you choose to learn, practice, and engage with may shape the infrastructure you'll have for life. This isn't about pressure to optimize. It's about recognizing a window of opportunity. The construction crews are on site. What would you like them to build? Fifth, for anyone with a family history of schizophrenia, this research doesn't change immediate risk or prevention strategies, but it offers a new direction for understanding and eventually treating the condition. The fact that multiple genes all affect the same construction process suggests that supporting that process